Hello everyone, this is Siren, and today's video is going to be a focus on rules, interactions, and different things. It's going to be the start of a new kind of series, just so people, especially newer players, are able to get quick answers to different topics without having to scroll through Discord forums or something like that. This one is going to be an overview on keywords, different current popular characters, things like Devil Jean and Paul Phoenix, and then the differences between destruction and when thing enters a discard pile. Those are going to be the main reviews. A few other things will get thrown in, things like the attack sequence, how those things are ordered, when different effects will fire off with characters like Deku 6. But the point of this series is just going to be to provide a good standing ground for new players and make it simpler and easier to join into the universe's card game. So with that, our first example here is the difference between destruction and when something enters the discard pile. So as we can see with Learning to Harden, the response is after this card is destroyed. Draw one card, right? So this effect cannot trigger if this card is face down because the response window is looking for that part right there, the after this card is destroyed. If that card is face down, it cannot be treated as being destroyed because that card effect is not live. This differs from a card like Tutoring Kirishima, where even if this card was face down when it's destroyed and it hits the discard pile, its response window is opened when it enters the discard pile, not when it's destroyed. So it is face up in a live ability when it's destroyed and when it hits the discard pile, but not when it's destroyed. That's the main difference. And then things like enormous acts, the static text, even though static texts are typically always active on things like committed cards, face down still don't count because a face down card is considered to have no abilities unless otherwise specified. One quick thing to mention with that is any of the new Outwit cards. Those will have their abilities sealed if something like a seal effect was placed on them, but something like Tutoring Kirishima will be in the discard pile when its response is looking to trigger, so sealing that card won't do anything if it's face down or face up. Moving on to the next one. This is going to be the interaction between Faith Shield and Beast Titan. This is an interaction that, while it might seem really simple at first, I had a few locals considering it, and it was something that was brought up to my attention that it's kind of hard to understand. But Face Shield has a response. Remove. After you block with this card, this attack deals no damage. Flip this attack after it resolves. Notice that it has a fired effect. It's not activated during... The response is not activated during Revolution. It's activated during the block, which is important to note. Beast Titan then has a response. After your first attack this turn resolves, build it face down. If it has shift, build it transform instead. How this interaction will work is probably pretty simple to older players, but Faith's Shield will flip the attack before Beast Titan is allowed to respond and build it down face down. Because at that point, the attack is no longer considered an attack, and it is no longer considered resolving correctly for Beast Titan. That's important for things like Smiling Titan attacks, where we're wanting to build it down, transformed, so we're able to use that form ability on it, right? This also goes for Dimensional Sphere, although Dimensional Sphere comes with the caveat of the attack never can resolve because it's removed during the block step. All right, and then moving into the order of operations. This was something I noticed a lot of people were wanting some clarity on. How the order of operations works for universes before we even enter the enhanced step. Before we make our check to play, it's considered to be in the transit zone. So any modifier effects will trigger then. Things like Zuku Midoriya 6. The important thing to note with this is that these effects will trigger no matter if something like Genkai's, which would be played on play, would trigger or not, because it's not a response, because the effects are applied despite if it's successfully played or not. So something like Izuku Midoriya will eat up those abilities before you make the check, which then means if you fail the check to make that attack, the effect cannot trigger, right? So moving on from that, we have on-play responses, things like Genkai's Guidance. This triggers after those effects. So an interesting interaction with that is that if you have an incredible display out when you play Fajin Flurry with Izuku Midoriya Quirks Unleashed, you can technically, you'll have the momentum to be able to respond and cancel Genkai's Guidance to be able to save your attack from being removed. Then moving on to the enhanced step. This is something I've noticed a fair few people are getting confused on, is that Blitz is technically considered part of the enhanced step. It is just the first part of the enhanced step before any other enhances can be played. This means that, again, talking about Izuku Midoriya's Quirks Unleashed, for example, after they play an attack, we skip that enhanced step, right? So that means that blitz abilities are not allowed to trigger because that enhanced step is skipped. So blitz abilities like on blindside slash will trigger. That's your opportunity to trigger them. These are optional abilities, so of course you're not required to, but if you choose to, they must be done before any other enhances are played, but after the check to play was made in any on-play responses. Moving on from that, we have the enhanced step. The enhanced step is just, the standard enhanced step we all know and love. It moves back and forth between players until both players consecutively pass. This means any enhanced abilities, which are typically highlighted with the yellow text, are played then. Otherwise, no other abilities other than responses, which have their response windows open, things like tutoring Kirishima, for example, are allowed to activate during this. And then moving on from there, we go to the block step. This is where things like Covert Assault or Dimensional Sphere will trigger. Dimensional Sphere removing the attack, and Covert Assault letting you ready 2 foundations. This is where you declare your block and make the check for it. If the block is not successfully played, note that none of these responses can be done unless you successfully play the block, which means the check is passed and any other surrounding conditions are passed, right? So that means after that, we move into the damage step. The damage step is pretty simple. It is just when we calculate our damage. Cards like Titan Injection, Airy, and Runaway will trigger at this point. Note that most of the time this will be a before the damage step type of response. So in the case of Titan Injection, it's remove spend a momentum before the damage step of your rival's attack to reduce its damage to your current health -1 to allow you to live on that 1 life. This is important because you don't want to miss the window. So how typically in a game you'll want to go block step, any responses before damage, or you'll say I have a response before damage is dealt. Then the damage step will trigger. You will be dealt whatever damage you should be being dealt. And then you will move on to the resolution part of the attack cycle, sort of. So the resolution is just simply after the damage step has resolved, and we move into the resolution of the attack, right? So number 5 Pro Hero lets you flip an attack after it's resolved. Note again that either an effect will say during the after this attack's resolution or before this attack resolves. Typically, before will be between damage step and resolution, and then after will of course be post revolution, but immediately after. So resolution is really treated as after this attack resolves, but that's neither here nor there. Moving on to another interesting point. A lot of people seem to be confused on what Breaker is exactly modifying. So we have a card like Barrier Shield, which will give any block we make Breaker 2, right? So one important thing to note with this is that Breaker is actually modifying the check value, not the difficulty value of the card. So your difficulty will remain the same for anything that cares about that. Things like Smiling Titan, for example. Your check value will simply be lowered. So in this case, Keiko's Aid then becomes a 3 check instead of a 5 check, right? This is important for things like Gentle Criminal, Smiling Titan, like I said, and a few others. But just remember that Breaker is only applying to your check. And only cards like Keiko's Aid, where it specifies difficulty, actually will apply to your difficulty. There's very few abilities in this game that actually will apply to your difficulty, but a lot of things like Breaker will apply to your check. Moving on to another interaction people are kind of confused about. Why is Fajium Flurry allowed to respond when it gets the buffs, the modifier effects from Izuku Midoriya Quirks Unleashed, right? So the key thing to note with this interaction between this and Spirit Sword Ultimate. Spirit Sword Ultimate says, discard a card after your rival plays an ability on the character, cancel it. This is something like any character that can just yeet an attack out of the card pool. I can't think of one at the moment, my apologies. But the key thing here is the this attack clause on Fajium Flurry, where it says, after this attack receives a speed bonus of 3 or greater, add the top card of your deck to your momentum. This supersedes the fact that it needs to be played and in the card pool technically for the responses to be played on the card. Whereas Spirit Sword Ultimate lacks this. It is missing the this card or this attack or something like that. Something referring to the card itself. It makes you unable to respond with it before the attack is technically played. So you're forced to stay. So that's why Fajium Flurry can respond, is that it has that this keyword. Whereas Spirit Sword Ultimate is missing this part of the text. Now, for another really interesting one is Devil Jin, who has the response after you check an attack, add it to your card pool and draw a card. Your check gets +1 for each attack in your card pool. So let's say we've already played an attack, right? And we want to play another attack, and we happen to check an attack, right? So how his response will work is the card you're technically playing, going back to the previous slide, the card you're playing, Gently Sandwich in this case, is currently in what's called the transit zone. It's an unofficial zone, but it's not quite in the card pool, not quite in your hand, right? So we play Armor Titan Rush, and now we're trying to play Gently Sandwich. We check a card like Smashing Stomp, and now this is when we would respond with Devil Jin. So we would put Armor Titan Rush was already in the card pool. We would then put Smashing Stomp in the card pool, and then that would give our check +2. But Gently Sandwich is still considered in the transit zone, so we're not allowed to have that count towards our buff bonus. Another interesting thing to note with him, and while this isn't an exact always possible to happen, is that you're able to trigger things like combo off of this. So Smashing Stomp has Slam keyword, and then Gently Sandwich has a combo enhance relying on having the Slam keyword on the previous attack in the card pool. So even though Armor Titan Rush didn't have that Slam keyword, we're now able to use that combo enhance because Smashing Stomp has Slam, right? Sorry, this is all being done in one take, so I might stutter a little bit here and there. But does that make sense as far as how that works? We're looking at the actual cards in card pool and not what's considered to be in the transit zone or in the hand either. Moving on to how stun works. So Paul Phoenix has the enhanced discard a card, your attack gains stun 2. And then Lockdown Knockdown has an enhanced commit a foundation, it gets +1 damage and +1 to its stun rating. Note that it already has a stun rating, right? So what this means is that we can buff either one of the stun ratings, but we don't get to buff both. So Lockdown Knockdown can get the stun 2 from Paul, and then we're allowed to activate that enhance to commit a foundation. And that will either turn the already existing stun on Lockdown Knockdown to a stun 2, or it'll turn the stun it was given from Paul into stun 3. This is important because it's something that's really confusing when it comes to understanding how it works. But the main thing to note is that it is applying to only one version of the stun keyword and not multiple versions. So you're only allowed to increase the one version, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the original version on the card. It just has to be one of the stun ratings on the card for the example of Paul Phoenix. Now, moving on to talk about keywords a little bit. So first we have EX3 on Piercing Drive up on the top left corner. And that attack simply says EX3, enhance, spend 1 or more momentum. This attack gets +3 speed for each momentum spent to pay the cost of this ability. So you can spend as much or as little momentum as you like as long as it's 1 or more. And then it's going to get 3 speed for each one of those momentum you spend, right? So if we were to spend 3 momentum on Piercing Dive, it would get +9 speed, making it a 12 high for 7 instead of a 3 high for 7. The next one is Powerful 4, which is worded very similarly to EX3. It's spend 1 or more momentum. This attack will get +4 damage for each momentum spent to pay the cost of this ability. So how powerful and EX work is it's EXX is the EXX and Powerful X are the standard formats for it. Where X is going to be the number of either stat, speed, or damage that you give to that attack. So in Powerful's case, it's getting 4 damage per because our powerful rating is 4. EX3 is giving our speed 3 damage because the EX rating is 3. It's important to note that that's how that enhances worked. You don't have to spend 4 momentum or 3 momentum. You are allowed to spend as much or as little momentum as you want. But per momentum, you're getting whatever's in that X spot, whatever's in that variable spot. The next one is Echo. This simply has the phrase, spend a momentum after this attack resolves. You may try to play it as your next form this turn. If you do, flip it after it resolves. So a few things to note with this is damage, like we were talking before, damage is calculated before resolution. So a character like Toga 3 is actually able to respond, put a card into her momentum from her discard pile, and then echo off of that stolen momentum. And another thing to note is that you are not required to play Echo. If they were to do something like Keiko's Aid or something else, you are allowed to choose not to Echo and simply spend the momentum for whatever reason you wish to. And then one last thing is that any face down attacks in your card pool, even if they dealt damage like Violent Pursuit, they're not allowed to actually go to momentum because they're no longer considered that attack. They're considered a face down card, a blank card in the card pool, right? So the next one is Flash. That simply has it's a form ability, so it's not exactly played. You don't get to choose whether or not you activate Flash, but it has the effect, skip this attack's enhanced step. Note that this will include the Blitz step like we were talking about earlier, right? That one's pretty simple and straightforward. And note that any form keywords are not treated like a EX or Echo. You're not choosing to play them. They simply happen. You're not allowed to say, I don't wish to. They are simply an effect that happens. The next one is Breaker 1 on Serum Transformation in the bottom left corner. Like we were going over earlier, it's just saying after you block with this card, your rival's next check to play a guard gets -1. So this is affecting the check again, so it would turn something like a 3 check into a 2 check, and so on and so forth. The next one is Deflect X Response. This is a response that's played from the hand without having to use any kind of check value. Like, you don't have to check for it, right? And it's simply add this card to your card pool. After the block step of your rival's attack, it gets -3 damage. Only one deflect ability can be played per attack. So on Ashido's Acid Dive, our deflect rating is 3, right? So this means that it's going to get -3 damage. Whereas if we had a card with deflect 4 on it, like Lightning Rod, that attack will get -4 damage. The minus damage is corresponding to the deflect rating. So the higher the rating, the less damage you'll take, and just like Powerful and EX were. And then our last one is Shift. Shift has the effect, as this card clears during your end phase, if you played it this turn, you may build it transformed opposite side up. So what this is saying with something like a Titan Large attacks is that when you play this attack, at the end of your turn when it's clearing, after you've played it, you are then allowed to build the back side of it, which is the backup side of the card. Note that this is another form-like ability, so it's not something we choose to play like Flash or Throw. It's exactly like those two keywords. It's nothing, we don't choose to play it though. That's just something that happens. It's an optional if you want to build it down, but it is something that happens and cannot exactly be canceled without some very strange cards like Confuse, right? And then just talking a little more on keywords, we've got Stun 2, which is just Stun 2. It's an enhance your rival commit to foundations. And then we've got a few more. Throw, which is after if this attack is completely blocked, it'll deal half damage rounded up during the enhanced step. Note that cards like Dimensional Sphere and Faith Shield will negate this because they either flip the attack before damage can be calculated, like in Faith Shield, or no, Faith Shield says it does no damage, and Dimensional Sphere will remove it before it's allowed to move to the damage step, since Dimensional Sphere triggers in the block step, right? A few others is a card like is Combo. Combo is looking for whatever its requirement is. So in this case with Feast, its combo is Potato, which is a specific card. So we have to play Potato and then we play Feast to be able to access that combo enhance. Note that if something like Devil Jin does interrupt the flow of cards in your card pool, you are not able to play. It has to be the exact preceding attack in your card pool. Last few are Shobijin's Message, which it has the unique keyword, which means if there are you cannot have multiple copies of this card in your stage. If ever there was to be 2 or more copies in your stage, you have to destroy one of them. And then the last one is Terrain. This is just saying that it's a asset usually that is playable. It tends to have an effect playable by either player, and it means that if another terrain were to come into play, either by your opponent or by you, the currently existing terrain has to stop existing. That card is destroyed and it is no longer allowed to be used, and it has to go to the discard pile, right? All right, and then last few slides is something like Tattered Costume. This was something that came up at my locals. Again, just a lot of this is chosen from my locals and from other sources, but Tattered Costume is not able to negate things like Shift or Throw. Even though they're keyword abilities, they're not playable. So your rival is never actually playing these abilities. They are just something that happens. So it's the same with Flash too, right? They can't choose to play Flash. Flash has to happen unless it's removed by a card. But that's simply how it works, is it's just they're not playing it. It's an effect that happens without them playing it. So Tattered Costume and cards like it can't negate that effect because it's looking for them to play in a keyword ability and not just have it happen. And then a card like Rejuvenating Smash, right? So Rejuvenating Smash triggers after you play it, right? So this would be when you make that check. So how this works is if you are at full life, you are not allowed to gain the life. You are allowed to draw the 2 cards, but you cannot gain those 2 life because you haven't lost if you're at full health, right? So let's say we're a 28 health character. If I am still at 28 health when I make the check and pass the check to play this card, I'm not allowed to gain my 2 health because I haven't taken any damage yet. And as we know, there's no overhealing in universes. This does not mean that I don't take the damage from the attack, however, as immediately after, I will take the damage from that attack, and I will have to just suck it up and take that damage, right? There's no choosing whether or not we want we want to take the damage, and when we get to add gain the health gain is triggered when the check is made and it's successfully passed, and then you move to the damage step like we were talking about earlier. And then the last one for today is going to be Edge Shot and Titan Cliff. This is one that's really hard to explain to new players because Titan Cliff reads enhance discard up to 3 cards and draw a card for each card revealed, or each card discarded, my apologies. The discarded card counts as being reviewed, right? So at first glance, this seems like it would trigger Edge Shot's responses multiple times, right? After you review an attack, your non-attack cards get -1 difficulty and da-da-da. And after you review a non-attack card, your attacks get +1 speed and +1 damage until the start of your next turn. So at a first glance, this looks like it will trigger Edge Shot, right? So if we were to discard 3 foundations, it seems like it would trigger Edge Shot's response 3 times, but this actually isn't how it works. Because all 3 of these cards are discarded at the same time, they only open 1 response window. So we are allowed to respond with both of Edge Shot's responses, but we cannot respond with 1 response multiple times. So even if we discard 3 attacks, we're only going to get to respond with Edge Shot once, which means we only get +1 speed and +1 damage to our attacks, not +3 speed and +3 damage like some people might think. But anyway, that is all I had for today. Leave any ruling questions you might have or any other kinds of ideas for this series you have in the comments below. I'm hoping to kind of make it into a beginner's universes guide, so hopefully we'll get to learn to play soon. But yeah, this has been Siren, and this has been Back to Basics UA Academy. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe, and share it with your friends, whoever's interested in playing universes. Bye-bye!